When we look at a approval side of things, from an AP perspective, again, if I just look at that overview screen, there is the new approved suppliers option there. You can also add that as a favorite, or get it from your navigation. But if we go into that approval, you'll see the ones that I've got there that I've done previously. So any new supplier that's there, any of the other ones that were updated and submitted, and we can see what happened. So if I just look at that new one that I created, it'll be a new supplier record. It also has this history tab. First point of approval history that you can see is basically that configuration enablement. So when you enable that configuration, as we mentioned, it is approved. So that's the action, and that's a system approved update that happened. Any subsequent changes, you can see at some point Emma declined that, and then it was resubmitted by Chelsea, still awaiting approval at this point. So looking at that sort of history as part of that, you'll be able to get that in. Now, since it has been available for a couple of days already, there has been some feedback in the sense of, what would change. So obviously from a supplier record, you do have the view audit trail. So if there's any changes, you can still view that audit trail. But some of those suggestions come through that, maybe we want to highlight that on screen for the reviewer or the manager to approve this document, or the supplier then ultimately afterwards. So that's effectively what we're also looking at going forward, is enhancing this. So it's not the last integration that we're doing or update on this one. There should be some additional ones. But ultimately, once they're happy with that, Emma's okay with this, they can approve that document, or that supplier in this case. It appears from the list, and if you navigate back to the suppliers themselves, that particular, I think it was new supplier, is now approved and ready to go. So obviously, from a user rights perspective, it is purely just a rights that needs to be assigned. So just quickly showing that to you as well. So from a role perspective, when we look at I'll just open that admin role to show you where it is on that accounts payable. The new role in there, can't see it now, come on. Sorry, went past it. There's the approved suppliers. So it's purely just a list view. So that approver has got that ability to do the approval for that. So initial step, get that in there. I think in some cases we've added some smart rules and smart events in some of the instances that you might be running. So that can remain in place. You don't have to go this way if you've got more advanced requirements there from an approval point of view. Just on the next one that we want to look at is that matching tolerance on purchasing. So what we've added from the initial part is the first step on what we call the three-way matching, but effectively giving the ability to bring in that match tolerance and activating any automated comparing of quantities and unit prices for purchase transactions. Now, the idea there is when we look at the setup itself, you can see there, from a configuration point, we're going to enable that. We've got the ability to add that match tolerance account in there as well. And then the important part there is this is defined on a transaction definition level. So if you've got multiple transaction definitions, you would need to define that on each of them, or wherever we require this matching or tolerance matching to be active. And then this is currently done on percentage basis. So a quantity tolerance of, in this instance, 5%, and a price variance of 5%. Obviously, again, in this one, if it's a $2,000 document that we're approving, that 5% is not much. But if it is a $300,000 document, we understand that the 5% might not be a good idea, because that's quite a hefty little change that we want to get through there. So again, we'll look at additional options there for that tolerance to initiate, but for now there is the ability to do that at that percentage level. Again, if we go back into Intacct, just giving you an idea of what it looks like, where to find it. So if we enable that, you can see there's our match tolerance, and I've added that on my purchase order and my vendor invoices. So you've got that ability to say, what, we've got our purchase requisition that goes through the approval phase, and when we, they might not know the exact cost at that stage, so that's okay. When we raise the purchase order, we can allow 2% tolerance on quantities and a 10% there on price variances. So we allow for that. But when we get the invoice, we don't want to allow that 10% again. We only want to allow 5% because now the invoice should be really within what we expect on that purchase order. So that's the initial configuration. And then you will also have the ability to set up who can override or accept these tolerances as well from a transactional point of view. So you process the transactions as normal, depending on what your workflow is and where it generates from. In my case, I've already created one purchase order in this instance that I forced with the exception in. So you can see basically, if we look at that, the status there at the end that's added, we've noticed that this one has got an exception on. So you can see there, it's flagged as the exception, and we can then start investigating what happened there. So opening that up, you can see exactly, that transaction is, it's one or more match tolerance exceptions. And then looking at the transaction itself, I'll just maximize that. On the line level, it'll flag each line that's got an exception on. So if you've got multiple lines in there, it will come through and let you know, there's an exception on that line. And if you hover over the exclamation mark there, you can see, what that exception is. So in this case, my price variance is, that's quite a big one, 900%. I think the purchase requisition was $3,500, and the purchase order came through with quite a bit more. So it just gives you an idea of what that tolerance or that variance is that were listed. And then from this point onward, the user with the correct authority can, again, decide what needs to happen. They can edit the document, change what they need to change, or they can just override that exception and sort of approve that as is and accept that tolerance as it comes through. So depending on level of authority and what's required, we can allow that or restrict that from proceeding through the process. And again, the same thing on the purchase invoice side. So each time, it's not a total three-way match in that sense. It looks at the current document and the preceding document. So a purchase order will look at the purchase requisition, for instance, and then the supplier invoice will look at the purchase order and match or look at those variances between the two documents. Alrighty. So again, quite exciting that this new feature has been introduced, but I think there is still a bit of work involved where we look at different options for that percentages, what's acceptable in different organizations as well from a tolerance point of view. One of the other things that was sort of added is just a AR payment ID. So it's more a sequence number that gets assigned. So you can see there, from posted payments on accounts receivable side, it'll add a new sequence number. Now, the idea there is if you had a posted payment that was basically applied to multiple invoices and adjustments, you now have the ability to look at a custom report, for instance, look at that payment ID, and you can see what are the documents that were associated to that particular payment. Now, when we bring that into play, what do we need to do? So it's purely configure that sequence number for payments on the AR side. And then any new payments that gets generated on the AR side will then generate that item or that number automatically. So just a bit of enhancement, make life easier from that perspective. If we look at the next one, this is more just around AR still. Well, this one is on both sides. So we can look at, from the AR perspective, if it's an inter-entity document that we generated, I can look from the AR side to the AP invoice, or I can open up the AP invoice and drill back to the AR invoice. So just a bit of enhancement that they've done there. And in conjunction with this one, I'll quickly show you what that looks like, and I'll show you a few other things on AR that were included in there as well as part of this release. So if I look at one of my inter-entity invoices and I open that up, you'll have the ability to look at, there's it was a rollback template that we used, and it created that AP invoice. So from there, you can physically drill down to that AP invoice, look at that, duplicate, edit, post that document, whatever we need to do. You can see that document still in draft mode. So it just gives you that flexibility and drill down capabilities throughout now. While we're on AR, one of the things they added as well, I think they have the apply payment on the document itself, but you do have the ability from this invoice list view to also apply payments. So it just makes it a lot easier. You don't have to navigate to receive payments in there while you're capturing invoices, or if you want to use it through this section, you can do that apply payment. It gives you the ability to just apply that payment on the fly, get the details in there. It's already linked to the AR invoice then. We post that, and that receipt is basically completed with that link back to the customer for one, obviously, but then also the invoice that they allocated. So just enhancing that feature there, giving you more flexibility of getting that in. If there is any questions throughout, obviously you can start getting that into the chat, but we'll have a couple of minutes afterwards just for some Q&A as well. The next section that there was a change on that I just want to highlight is more on the contracts. Now, I know everyone on the call is probably not using contracts at this point, but just looking at those, just from a contract point of view, you do have the ability to now recognize revenue, on the invoice level. So generally we had the deferred revenue, and it's still available, obviously, but you now have the ability to bring that through, and on that contract line level to say, you know what, I want to recognize revenue on invoice, and that's associated to each individual line. Important just to note as well, if we activate this feature, as soon as you create a contract and have that active on the line level, from there onwards you won't be able to deactivate that feature going forward. So it will be sort of a fixed feature. Just to give an idea of what that entails. So when we look at our subscriptions itself, we look at our revenue management, that's effectively where we'll switch this on. So going to revenue management, going to the configuration, and then, if we look at that, we can enable that revenue recognition on the invoice stage. So it gives you just a bit of flexibility bringing that in. And then obviously if we go into the contracts itself, that's where we can activate that on the contract level. So I'll just include some of my private contracts and edit one of them just to give you an idea of what that looks like. So on each of the line levels, so it's not on the contract level, but on the line level, you've got the ability then to recognize revenue on the invoice. Okay, so just the easy way of getting that in, and then when you start processing those invoices through, recognizing the revenue instead of that deferred revenue going through later on, it's done on that line level. Now, just back to the sort of new feature that we'll add in. I'll pop across to our next one, and that's more on our project management side of things. So there's quite a few things there that's possible. So in this one, what's added is basically just the ability on that project summary to bring in the budget information. So obviously when we looked at contracts initially, on projects initially, and I'll show you on the screen again, we've got the ability to just enter the value there on screen for, our expected budget on revenue, expected cost, expected labor, for instance, or expected duration in hours. But it's not a financial budget. In this case, once we start allocating that financial budget, we can then bring that through on screen, and you can look at those comparisons or variances as we process that. So it gives us a few more options in that instance. So looking firstly, I'll go into a project itself and show you that feature. So probably the first one, we need to just activate that. So I'll show you that one again. So on projects, you've got the ability to enable that through the configuration to say, yep, I want to allow that budget tracking in there. I can't remember where that is exactly. There's a few configurations in there. I think it's at the bottom. I can't see it now. But anyway, so the first part is allow that budget. We've got the default budget, so there's the budget column that we've added in there. So there's the section that we basically added in for this particular release. So that's the financial summary, budget, and comparison. So yes, we want to show the budget column, and we also want to show that budget's difference column. And then just some options. What's the default GL budget ID? So, we want to look at our project budgets, or we want to look at our financial budget. So depending on what budget version you use, that's the one that we do. And then also we can allocate the default accounting group. So yes, it's okay to look at revenue if there's revenue involved on your projects, but generally it's more around the costs and the expenses that we're going to look at. So do we want to look at our labor cost? Do we want to look at our general expenses? So all of that can then be decided on and then activated as a default. So that's the one part, is activating that. When we look at the project itself, that's where it gets interesting. So when I open that up, going into my summary, we still have this feature where we can say what that billing project or the budget billing amount is, budget cost is, budget duration is. So it still does that calculation as normal, but we've added the section so you can see the financial budget there. And as you saw, the default budget and account group for budgeting is selected, but if you want to change that, you can on the fly change the budget that you're looking at, or instead of looking at other expenses and comparing that to the budget, we can bring in and say, you know what, I want to look at my total costs. So instead of just that other expenses, it brings through total cost compared to the total cost budget, and then does the variance. So on the fly, your project managers has got more flexibility of looking at different areas within the budget. So revenue, I might not have a budget in there. Yep. So you can see then nothing pulls through, but it gives them just the capability looking at specific areas, just looking at labor cost there. That's what we've got actually. That's the budget. We still have some budget left, so that's a good thing. Just that clear insight into what's available on the projects, what budgets we've utilized, what we've entered, and what that variance is that's still available. I'll just cancel over that one. And then one of the interesting ones that came about is, and I'm pretty sure some of you saw it, but haven't actually really looked at it. It's just looking at our beta lists. So what they've done is given you the opportunity to use some of the beta lists that they've enhanced, and a lot more screens will go into that direction. Now, what that means is it's not a fully released screen as yet. You've got the ability to use the current screen as is, or start using this beta screen and then provide feedback as well. But there's a couple of options there to navigate around, and you can see things that we can do in there. So in the new list, that's basically the areas where they're available, so where you can start utilizing them. So you can see within the attachments in this example, we can turn on the beta, and there's a couple of things that you can do. So they've enhanced or extended this to a few other screens. And I'll jump into one of them just to give you an idea of what that looks like and what you can do when you start utilizing that. So if I look at my suppliers, for instance, you can see that's my standard screen as it is at this stage, but you've got the ability to turn on this beta lists interface. Now what that does is it'll change over the screen and give you a bit more of a different interface. And that's really where they're driving to, changing the UI, getting to that next gen UI that they're working across. Now, obviously, it is beta, so that's the one thing. You can always turn it up and go back to the normal navigation screen. If there's anything that you find that's useful or not useful, or you want added in there, there is an option to send feedback. So that's just a general idea of bringing feedback from everybody back into the product that we can bring in. A couple of things. So obviously you can see, we can filter there. I just want to look at my Australian suppliers, so you can filter there, and then I want to look at Tasmania, for instance. So you've got the ability to bring that filtering, do multi-level filtering. You can see there's a couple of filters applied at this stage. So at this stage, looking at my active suppliers, so that's still there. If it's inactive, it doesn't display by default, but you can obviously show both of them. One-time use, no, and then we've added those additional filters. So the more filters we apply, obviously, the more it goes down. In your normal screen, you have the ability to create new views and those type of things, but we can configure these columns on the fly. So you can select, what I want to bring in my credit limit, for instance, in there. I want to bring in some comments and apply that. So on the fly, you've got the ability to change the screen, and you can see, bringing those credit limits, bringing the comments. I don't have any on those particular ones, but bringing those additional columns in there to make life easier, or getting things that we're looking for. Now, part of this one, you can see we still have those normal views. So if you like the view, it's there. if there's things that we want to, enhance, I want to bring these credit limits to the front, and I want to bring these comments to the front. For instance, you can now drag and drop these columns around. So that's a new little feature that's enhanced on these lists as well. Now, while you're busy with this, you can also switch to that multi-view. So you can see on the left there, then you've got that list of suppliers that we were looking at. But on the right is the actual screen that we normally use for the supplier to go into it. So I can quickly just tab through multiple suppliers there, adding them, editing, changing them on this new sort of type of list screen that we've got available. So there's something to look at, consider, giving it a go. There's a couple of things obviously that's on there that you can utilize. It might make life a little bit easier to navigate around, searching for things if that's sort of the area that you responding or need to work in. Obviously, it's not across all the screens of Intacct at this point, but with these limited beta screens that we've got on all the lists, and the feedback that we get from all the customers, that will ensure that once we're ready with what we want on these screens and how they operate, that can be rolled out to the rest of the application as well. So worthwhile just looking into those as part of that one. Okay. Now there's a couple of additional features that I didn't sort of plan to show you today, but just to take note of. So from a GL transaction perspective, you can restrict that on entity or top level. So those are some of the new features. On the GL trial balance report, you can exclude adjustments. So when you print that report, you can either include them or exclude them as part of that. I think from the DDS data delivery services, so if you subscribe to that service, you now have the option to configure decimal places for rounding. So when those transactions come out, generally it would have been just the 2 places, for instance. You can now configure that to make sure that the rounding is efficient in the way that you want to do that. And then there's a couple of other things, just like on the interactive customer report writer, there's some updates and XML templates that you can apply. So it's a bit more technical. Probably didn't think it's relevant in this initial area, but they are there. Use those release notes, go through them, speak to us, speak to your account manager. We're always there to help and assist you with new features that you might want to look at. I thought just before we wrap this up, just to give an idea of some of the early adopted programs that we've got running. So obviously there's new functionality coming out, so always exciting to hear about those. But if they're an early adopter, what that means is it's being rolled out into a select number of customers within Australia as well, and they sort of volunteer to assist with the testing, so they can utilize the new features, but it is part of the testing phase to make sure that it's viable before it's available for general release. One of those is the AP automation, so the OCR capabilities that's coming into Intacct. So that's been there and it's being tested. But there's a couple of other ones that I thought I'll just highlight so that you're aware of them. Exciting to know that they're coming, but also some of you might be in a position and want to look at start testing that, subscribing to that EA program and getting involved in that as well. So we'll get some details, more details around that, but I thought I'll just share some of those. Now the initial part there, bank transaction assistant. So I'll show a little slide on that one shortly, but that's a new exciting one that's coming out. There's some new import bank files that's available. Now that's more for some of the banks that we don't support, obviously external to Australia, where you still need to import. So there's a couple of new import templates and things that they support there that will be available. We've got the ability to do single payments. Oh, sorry, before we get to single payments, that SIT for people using projects and contracts, for instance, there's Sage Intelligent time. So that's been around for a while, and I'll talk to that as well on the slide. But basically, that allows you to do intelligent timesheets. It's now the EA program is basically embedding that into Intacct itself. At this stage, it is a sort of external application that gives you the ability for that integration, but it's now coming into Intacct as an early adopter, so we can see what that looks like if it's a more suitable option. Single payments for multiple customers, also talk about that. We've got the revamped fixed assets, so that's generally it's a new look and feel, so it'll be a new look and feel based on the same look and feel as the rest of Intacct at this stage. but it's also got that next-gen UI. So a couple of changes coming through there. It'll also include a new asset dimension. So just bringing that in, making life easier, having that already as a dimension, so you can report on that from all areas. Top and entity level processing. It will also have that multi-book depreciation posting. So at this stage on the fixed asset register, we've got your normal financial book posting and tax depreciation, but in this one it's got multi-book depreciation posting, so you can actually post both books into different ledgers, so it makes reporting a lot easier. And it's also what we call self-implementation. So it's a subscription rather than a provisioning done by Sage themselves. So a lot of exciting things coming out there. And then from a consolidations point of view, they've introduced that partial ownership. So it's basically bringing the benefits of that ownership consolidation, improving the accuracy and efficiency in the consolidation process. And that's basically accounting for that varying ownership percentages. Now, that's quite important as well, because it's not just that varying percentages, it's also looking at keeping that per reporting period. So if there's any changes throughout the year, for instance, regarding the ownership of these entities, that ownership history is also managed, and we can report on that per period. So that's quite a few things that they'll bring in there.
So the first option that I want to show you today is just looking at the bank transaction assistant. Now, the idea there is just to save time processing customer payments from the bank data that you receive. So firstly, this setup would basically be entailing setting up rules where we assign customers. So that bank data come in, we have the rules, it interrogates the data and basically assign the customer to the transaction. Then in addition to that, it brings in the option to do and process bulk payments. So looking at what invoices to apply for those customers assigned, and if there's no invoices available, giving you the option to create advances for the customer. So in all, it's basically just bringing in the automation piece where we have our bank transactions coming in from our bank feed, assigning the customer rules to create or to get the customers assigned automatically, and then go through the process and create that receipt in Intacct and allow for the auto matching through the bank rec.
Going on the next one, I think probably not all of you are aware of that, but if you look at the projects, for instance, or you look at the time and expenses modules within Intacct, there has been an addition it's been a while ago already, regarding the Sage Intelligent time. And what that is basically just the ability to predict some of the time. So it's integration to Outlook, and what you've got available is looking at examples like this. There's activities from your calendar events where we can say, there's a project meeting that happened there. You can physically assign a project and a task to that, and that will drive the timesheet entry for you. So it'll nominate, or you can drag and drop activities from that Outlook interface effectively as timesheet entries. So that's there, that's currently available. The only thing that they're doing now in the early adopter is bringing that into Intacct. So it's more of an embedded feature. So it's within the platform instead of the external object that you access to do and utilize that intelligent time. So quite a nice thing to use. So I think for the guys that does use timesheets, if you haven't seen intelligent time, let me know. We can definitely have a quick session just to look at what is available now, and obviously what to expect once it's embedded within Intacct as well going forward. The last section there, just to give an idea, the introduction of that single payments for multiple customers. So effectively, if you've got this option available, or on the EI side, you will then have the selection. So when we receive a payment, we've got the option of three options available. So it's still a single customer's AR invoices. You select that from the list. It's one customer, and we just apply that against the payment against all the invoices. Or we use that parent and child customer. So if there's any of those parent-child customer links associated on your list, you can select that, and it will bring through all the customer invoices for both the parent and child, and you can do a single receipt against those, just making life easier. And then the last one, quite impressive there as well, is looking at that multiple customer AR invoices. So you can then have the ability to apply one receipt across multiple customers, multiple invoices. So quite a few things that's exciting. That's obviously in the making. It's there, being tested, and then hopefully general availability soon afterwards as well.